On the Betting on America podcast, we're continually exploring how the United States can stay ahead of the global economic and technology race. We talk trade, technology, finance, competitiveness, and deal making. Hard bargains and smart deals are, of course, an important part of the story. But deals by themselves do not forge a global economic order. Values do, and the leaders that embody them. After all, that's what Americans of earlier generations did in shaping the global economic order that we now inherit. But some people are asking the question, are those days behind us? Have we lost our muscle memory for forging alliances, shaping the rules of the game for the global economy, and bringing more countries on board with a shared set of values? Can we relearn those lessons in American leadership in the world and apply them to a new era, an era of economic security? We'll talk about these questions and more with David Beasley, former congressman, former governor of South Carolina, and most recently, executive director of the United Nations World Food Program, where he accepted the 2020 Nobel Prize for Peace on behalf of the organization. I'm Navin Girishankar. Welcome to the Betting on America podcast. Governor Beasley, it is an immense honor to have you here at CSIS. I've enjoyed our conversations, but to have this here and share it with people is phenomenal. Thank you.
It's great to be with you. Thank you very much.
Well, there are many things I want to talk to you about, but this conversation, I wanted to focus on the underlying values and virtues necessary for American leadership in the world. And I hearken back to your experience at World Food Program, where you were executive director from 2017 to 2023, longer than most. And you received the Nobel Peace Prize on behalf of the organization in 2020. Tell us a little bit about that experience, because it's so emblematic of something that I feel maybe sometimes we're losing, which is what is it like for an American to lead on the international stage?
Well, I can tell you, getting that phone call for the Nobel Peace Prize, that's a phone call you don't get often, but that's another discussion for another day. But by the way, that helped me really raise the awareness of how bad food insecurity was around the world. Mm-hmm. When I got the phone call, Trump had just gotten elected in 2016, and I was meeting with some friends, and Democrat and Republican senators, talking about the world, and I got a phone call to go meet with some other friends. And I'm on the way to this meeting in December before the inauguration, and sort of a liberal friend of mine in the United Nations calls and says, hey, Governor, you going to take a job with Trump? I said, no, I didn't do it with Bush, and I have no interest in any job at all. Yeah. How about work for the United Nations? I'm like, look, I'm not the United Nations kind of guy. And he says, we're at the UN, we're very scared of Trump. And I jokingly said, well, you shouldn't be, because Trump had some pretty significant comments back then about the UN. And so a group of Republican and Democrat senators said, David, you've got to take the World Food Program. You're the only one that can talk Trump out of cutting strategic, effective international aid. And I said, look, I don't want a job. Let me try to do it. Well, anyway, I got talked into it. Yeah. And so I backed into this role. And in fact, I was able to talk Trump and the Trump administration out of cutting the budget, and actually grew it quite a bit back then. But it was how I made the arguments and what would happen if you don't do this type of thing. But when I took the role, there were 7.6 billion people on the planet. 80 million didn't know where the next meal was coming from. So I'm thinking, having been a former United States governor, business person, you set goals, objectives, benchmarks, execute a plan, I could put the World Food Program out of business. There's no way I can't do that. Well, the numbers went backwards. It went from 80 to 135 the first year. Why? Man-made conflict, climate shocks. Well, the second year, COVID hits, supply chain disruption, and the number goes from 135 to 276. And just when you think it can't get any worse, Russia invades the breadbasket of the world, and it goes to 350 million. And so that's a whole array of opportunities of discussion right there.
Yeah. Well, give us a couple of examples, particular countries where you really brought difficult conversations together, or I should say parties together, to solve big problems. Because these are, especially when you're talking about conflict, this is not like getting Republicans and Democrats together. These are people firing at each other, trying to eliminate each other.
You know, I've had several friends lately said, you know, you were able to sit down and negotiate with the Houthis, the Taliban, Maduro in Venezuela. Maybe you better come back to Washington and see if you can get the D's and the R's together. And I have found that whether you're sitting down with the Taliban or the Houthis, shoot straight, show respect. That doesn't mean you have to agree, but they control the areas that I've got to move food supplies in. So I have no choice but to sit down. Yeah. And it's easy to sit on your high horse and say anything you want to make yourself look good to the crowd back home.
Yeah.
But if you take that approach, people die because they starve to death because the extremists that are in control of a particular area. And so the way I work, like for the Houthis, for example, this is a good example. The United States, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, the coalition that was fighting the Houthis and Nasrallah in Yemen, they put a blockade on Hadida. And 85% of all the food that comes into Yemen comes through that port. And I'm like, you can't do this. This is going to kill innocent children all over the country. So Scott Pelley and I at 60 Minutes did an incredible, powerful story about the tragedy of what was happening. We need to unleash the blockade and find a way to resolve this issue. And anyway, they dropped the blockade, and the Houthis, fell in love with me. Oh, you're so nice. You're so great. You're wonderful. I'm like, whoa. I didn't do this because I'm on your side.
Yeah.
I did this because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And if you cross this line, I'll bust your butt too. I said something else. I said, I'll bust your butt too. Yeah. And 6 months later, they crossed the line, and I came in hard and did what I needed to do, and we resolved the issues. And so when you go into countries, the old way of USAID and European humanitarian and development dollars was just handing out food. And you'll do that for 100 years. But I'm like, give me the flexibility to put down water systems and water wells so that people can feed themselves and create sustainability and resilience and create economic opportunity. And I've never met an African woman that wanted aid. They want the tools, the resources, so they can take care of their families, feed their village. And I could share story after story after success story where we would go into a country, let's say Mali and Niger. 80% of the villages that we were able to do this, when a shock happened, they didn't need outside support. Right. So it saves taxpayers money when we do it right and strategically.
Right. Well, there are so many things you say there. Let's take one thread at a time. One is this marrying of humanitarian assistance with long-term development support, or developing the capabilities of people. I think it's a powerful point. I remember we were talking about my time now almost 20 years ago living in Ethiopia, and the frequency of food appeals was concerning even then. And the challenge of then saying, what does that mean structurally for the economy to grow and give people the capability to grow their own food was an issue then, and it seems to continue to be an issue now. Your thoughts on what we can do in our government to make this work more effectively?
Well, to me, it's really not that complicated, particularly in these more difficult areas, because people generally don't want aid. My thought is, every humanitarian dollar, how do I create a community improvement opportunity? And for example, at the World Food Program, working with our beneficiaries, we rehabilitated over 3 million acres of land, built over 84,000 kilometers of feeder roads, grow a crop and get it to the marketplace, 26,000 kilometers of irrigation lines, and I could go on and on, giving them the tools so they can self-sufficient, create a community that literally can be robust. And it was just so heartbreaking when these major agencies, United States, Germany, the EU, won't give you the flexibility. Yeah. And so when I go speak to the Parliament, go speak to the U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and lay out, if you'll give me the flexibility, the response would be immediate. But the bureaucracy many times stands in the way. Yeah. But where we had the flexibility, we achieve food security, independence, self-sufficiency, and that's the long-term solution.
Indeed.
And I get this question. It doesn't matter whether it's a member of the Bundestag from Bavaria or a member of the House of the Senate from Illinois to Texas.
Yeah.
Why should I send my money, my taxpayers' money, down to Guatemala or Honduras or Mali when I've got education funding needs,
Right.
infrastructure funding needs, healthcare funding needs? And I'm like, that's a very, very valid and good question. So let me explain it to you, not hypothetically, but anecdotally. Because if you're not going to help people in need out of the goodness of your heart of another country, you better do it out of your national security interests
Yes.
and your financial interests. Now, let me explain it in such a way that you understand, and I lay out realistic, what's really happening on the ground.
Right.
And when the senator or congressman, no matter how left or right they are, when they hear that, they're like, well, we should do that. I'm like, exactly. Let's do that, because let me give you, if you don't mind, let me give
Please.
you two
Yes.
simple, quick examples.
Yes.
When you don't address root cause, when you
Right.
stick your head in the sand. Let's take Syria. The Europeans failed to address the problem in Syria in advance. 1 million refugees in Syria over a 5-year period, financial tab, $125 billion. $70 a day. I could feed that same Syrian inside Syria for 50 cents a day. People don't move and leave their home if they have
Right.
food in any degree of peace.
Right.
But any mom and dad, if they can't feed their children, they go do what they have to do that. And we survey at the World Food Program people all the time. They don't want to leave home. And they'll actually move 3, 4, 5, 6 times before they'll finally leave their homeland. So do the math. 50 cents a day, $70. That's 140 times, right?
Yeah.
So divide 140 into 125 billion. So, Mr. Congressman, we would have spent less than $1 billion of feeding the refugees at their home country versus the fact that you stuck your head in the sand, didn't address root cause, and it cost you $125 billion, which means you would have had $124 billion to put to
Right.
healthcare, education, infrastructure needs. Same thing on the United States border. Cost of sheltering a child, $3,750 a week. That's $60 million a week.
Yeah.
I can have a resilience program
Right.
back home for $1 to $2 per child per week. So, Mr. Congressman, A, you want to spend $3,750 per child per week, or B, $1 to $2 per child per week, or C, oh, I'm sorry, there's not a C. and every one of them will say, well, let's fund B. I'm like,
Right.
well, then fund it.
Yeah. But so, Governor, is it just that our leaders are not effective in making this case?
So I always try to make the case in such simple terms, in a simple way, because the congressman's got to be able to explain it to his constituents.
Yeah.
And if I talk the way the UN talked, and by the way, my first few months, I got a lot of the UN people upset because I didn't talk the UN way. You know,
Right.
talk about, well, IPC level 3.5. and,
Right,
you know,
right.
people don't, well, what are you talking
Bureaucracy,
about?
right.
And so when I would give these anecdotal stories that can be told, you know, in short verse, so to speak, to their people,
Right.
the funding level I started getting from the United States Congress was going up, and then
Right.
after about a year, all the UN communications department was like, we need to talk like that. You know, we need to
Right.
talk like that.
Right.
And so the case is not being made in a way that's practical to the taxpayer, because the American taxpayer that's the most giving
Right.
citizen of almost any nation in the world.
Right.
When they know people are suffering, they want to help. And so you got to make the case in such a way
Right.
they understand it.
My own observation, it seems, and I welcome your thoughts on this, is that it's good to make the case for, like you have, for why this is important in our national security interest, why it's in our national security interest. It's also important to make the case for doing it more efficiently. And I think you've done that. And I think it's going to be with us for some time. Yet nothing screams leadership more than what you do when people are hungry.
I tell you what, there's nothing more heartbreaking. When you think about the simple fact, today there's over $600 trillion worth of wealth. I don't know what the actual number is. You may have that, but and to think that every 5 seconds someone's dying from hunger, a child's dying every 8 to 9 seconds from hunger, it's heartbreaking and it's avoidable. And I tell my friends, my Democrat and Republican friends in the House and the Senate, I said, you're like little children, sticking your head in the sand. I said, you got leaking water lines in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And it's going to cost you $1,000 to go up there and fix those leaking water lines.
Yeah.
But no. You want to fight over where to put the buckets. You don't address the root cause.
Right.
So a year from now, it's not $1,000 fix. You've now got to replace the mahogany tables, the sheetrock, the curtains, the flooring, the carpet. And it's a $100,000 fix.
Yeah.
Be strategic. It's one thing to have ridiculous, outlandish, outrageous foreign aid that doesn't do good. I mean, we know, we've seen that.
Yeah.
But strategic, effective international aid, I mean, it's why the people in the world love America, and it saves taxpayers in America as well. Yeah. And that's what makes America great, because we're good. When we cease to be good, we'll cease to be great.
Yes. Tremendous experience at WFP. I think that we should take notes on what you've done there, because it'll be important for American leaders on the international stage going forward. Let's talk about the private sector. I mean, you're a former business person. One of the things that we're focused on when we talk about the technology race is the role of the U.S. private sector around the world, not only as investors, but also exporters of great products and technologies that would be valuable for people around the world, particularly in the global south. Give us your thoughts on the U.S. tech offer. And I'm talking about things like agribusiness and agritech and digital economy and so on and so forth.
Do I believe in charity? Arguably, I've heard it said that I've raised more money for poor people in charity than anybody in the history of the world. I don't know. Do I think charity is important? Yeah, I do. But do I think that's the long-term answer? No, I don't. The long-term answer is private sector. It is clear. When you think 200 years ago, when the world's population was 1.1 billion, 85 to 95% of the people in the world were in extreme poverty.
Yeah.
Today, less than 9%. So we have built systems and programs and institutions that's sharing more wealth than any time period in the history of the world. Now, try telling that to the 9%. So the answer, as I tell many of my young friends, don't tear it down for the 91 to reach the 9.
Right.
We've got to be strategic, got to focus, and that means we need to be on top of our game. And that means how do we empower and incentivize the private sector to do more. One of the things I did when I was United States governor was special tax credits and incentives for special types of industry, and especially for hiring people from rural areas that were depressed.
Yeah.
Amazing response.
Yeah.
Our unemployment rate went down, incredible. Personal income was going up. And you were seeing people who had never experienced the American dream see hope again.
Yeah.
And so here in the United States, we've got to be and continue to be the leader in this, in the areas that you are now talking about. We have to get focused. Both parties have got to quit this fighting. I'm so upset with both parties. They've got to come to the middle and understand that this is our future. And the future of the world depends on us, in my opinion, peace and stability. Because when America leads, and the way we lead, capitalism with a heart, that's a formula that no country in the world has been ever able to duplicate.
Indeed. Let's talk about your experience as governor. You alluded to that, and particularly fighting unemployment and really addressing what is a perennial issue, which is the workforce issues that we continue to face now. So just to put an accent on it and get your thoughts on this, we are in the midst of multiple technology revolutions. AI, quantum, biotech, clean tech, lots of opportunities. You hear this all the time. Yet at the same time, we're coming on the back end of maybe several decades of dislocation, rural versus urban, people who are left behind from opportunities. What are your words of wisdom on how to address this now? Because we could really see years of prosperity coming, shared wealth, or we could see growing inequality.
This is critical. And it is absolutely essential that the Democrats and Republicans get their act together on this. One of the things when I was a governor, when it came to jobs and economic opportunity, we lay aside our political differences. And I would give the D's credit, the R's credit, making certain that everybody was at the table, because it's extremely important. Investors want to know their stability. Investors want to know that the leadership is together. Because when investors see that the political landscape is stable, and that the leaders or the future leaders are all generally in agreement, but there might be some tweaking differences here or there, then they are obviously more convinced that a sound investment here is not going to be risky.
Right.
And that's where we've got to be again. We need to focus on this in a way that we've not seen in quite some time. When I look at what's happening in China and other places, and how strategic and how effective and where they're moving towards, we can't afford to sit on our laurels and be bickering. We've got to come together. Whoever the next president of the United States has got to bring the parties together and saying we've got to be a team. We've got to be one on this, because we can't afford to be a house divided. That's my opinion. And bring in the leaders and say, the business leaders, and say, all right, what is it you got to have? What is it, and where are we going to go? And by the way, profits are important, but we need for you to also help us take ownership of poverty and poor neighborhoods, and not just give us a little bit of charity, but truly take ownership.
Yeah.
If the brilliant minds like we know that are putting women and men out in space now, and what they're doing with technology and AI, goodness gracious, there's no reason we can't end poverty while we lift up all Americans at the same time.
Absolutely. Beautifully stated, beautifully stated. Let's get your wisdom on how to build consensus, because when we do a lot of work trying to see how the U.S. stacks up against China. And one of the things that comes out strongly is that people feel, and it is true, that the PRC is able to make decisions and move swiftly, and that there is a premium on being able to move quickly in this day and age. And we have a boisterous democracy, and we love it, and that's who we are. But it also means sometimes that we are slower. And then when we start fighting, we're even slower. How do we solve this problem?
Again, I don't think it's really that complicated.
Yeah.
The Democrats and the Republicans, the White House and the Congress, they don't sit down and really talk together. They're talking at each other through social media. And when that's your platform of negotiation and discussion, you'll never be able to effectively, efficiently move in the direction that you need. I have found when you sit face to face, and this is what it's going to take, sitting face to face, say, how do we do this together? I'll give you credit, you give me credit. Let's don't worry about who gets credit. Let's just do it and sit down. I have found my best friends when I was in the House of Representatives were my biggest enemies on the floor. But we would fight it out, but we were friends.
Right.
When I was governor, I would bring I served in the House as a Democrat, and I served as governor as a Republican. And I know when you sit down, break bread with someone of a different political persuasion and talk, it's amazing what happens. I've seen it in the most difficult places around the world, whether I was sitting down with the Taliban or the Houthis or Maduro down in Venezuela. When you sit down and show some respect, not an agreement, it's amazing what happens and what you can achieve. And that's, as I was saying earlier, many of my friends said, you were able to win the Nobel Peace Prize. You were able to bring some of the hardest dictators in the world to the table to open up the doors and help on the humanitarian side and bring peace. Maybe we need for you to bring this back to Washington, D.C. And I said, well, that might be a bridge too far. That might be a little more than I can do, Right. But honestly, it breaks my heart when I see my friends, Republican and Democrat, just doing nothing but attacking each other in social media and not sitting down and talking, because America loses when we don't talk to one another. We can still have our differences, but it isn't any more complicated than that. But everybody, there's a difference between looking good and doing good. And with social media now, it's all about looking good to your followers. And now it's being monetized, of course, which is horrific, and I think go bring a democracy as we know it to an end within 15, 20 years. But when you sit down together versus tweeting against each other all day long with misinformation and disinformation, it's hard to find a common ground. But yet when you sit down together, it's remarkable what happens. We've got to get back to the basics in that regard.
Yeah.
That's my genuine belief, and I've seen it in the roughest, toughest places around the world. And do you want to look good to your crowd, or do you actually want to do good? And if you will actually put doing good ahead of looking good, obviously you want to do good. Try to make it look good as you can, but don't let it get backwards.
I have one question I wanted to ask you. That was beautifully stated, inspiring. China. And, you know, you've been around so many countries. We were just talking, and I don't know, you've been to 15 cities in the last 30 days or something, like unbelievable. How do you see the China challenge for the United States, both in terms of our technological and economic competition, but importantly about our values?
I've said to both Democrat and Republican administrations in the last 10 years, I said, the approach of the West has been a knee-jerk reaction to China. And if you maintain that trajectory, the West loses. I said, you need to have a strategic plan. We need to all come together and understand this, because China is there whether you like it or not. You can kind of kick and scream and act like a little child about it, or you can really put together a strategic plan that aligns the world in the right way, in the right direction. Some of that needs to be public. Some of that needs to not be so public, but that's above my pay grade, as we would say right now. But to sit like we've been doing in the past 5, 6, 7 years, I can tell you from country to country, in Africa to Central South America, prime ministers and presidents would tell me in private, Mr. Beasley, where's America? China is coming in and doing this and doing that. We want to be friends with America. And it's like we've been sitting in the back seat kind of watching and not doing what we need to do. It will cost us in the long run big time if we don't strategically engage with a strategic plan going forward. And that is going to require putting the best minds that we have. The Europeans look to America for this type of leadership. And it's time we provide that leadership. I've actually talked, not to tell who, but several of the biggest leaders in Europe about this, and they're ready to have those types of meetings with the U.S. to discuss how do we move the ball forward. Because failure to address this strategically, I think the West will pay a mighty big price, and the world will then pay a mighty big price.
Let me end with Africa, because you spent a lot of time on the continent, myself included. I'm inspired by your stories that you tell of some of the countries we've both been to. Bring it home for us in terms of what the people you've talked to in Africa are looking for from the United States, further to what you just said.
What really upsets you when you look at U.S. aid and European aid, the United States or the Europeans would go into a country and do a little bit over in this corner. The Germans would do a little bit over the other corner, and France would do a little bit over there. And there's no scaling up in strategic economic plan that brings us all together, like a Marshall Plan. And I can tell you, I haven't met that African woman that wanted outside aid. They want the tools that they need to take care of their families and rebuild. And so what I've been asking, particularly the major corporations in the world, I said, I don't want your charity in Africa. I want your engagement, taking ownership of what it does it mean to allow the supply chain systems and the rule of law to be the way of life there. Because my opinion, corruption is the number one problem in Africa. Number one problem. And I have sat down with more African leaders and talked about this, because the young people in Africa, holy mackerel. And the women in Africa, they don't have to go to Harvard Business School to understand capitalism. You give them the tools they want, they need, Africa could feed Africa, and the young people in Africa are ready to explode but for corruption. I've had more mothers tell me my son, my husband didn't want to join ISIS or Al-Qaeda. I'm talking about like in some rough areas like in the Sahel or places like that. But Mr. Beasley, the supply chain system, we didn't have food. We didn't have medicine. And these extremist groups shut down those supply chain systems. And corruption is a major part of that. And you see the numbers of extremism grow and grow and grow. But when the young people see they can get a job and have opportunity, but when they look at the corruption and they see, what is my choice? Then they make the bad choice. But I've been all across Africa. I've seen what China's doing. I've seen what happens when America is not there. And China steps in. For every inch we back up, China steps in with a foot. And America is, in my opinion, is the light of the world.
Yeah.
And we need to lead again. When we lead, other nations and people, they survive and they begin to thrive. In America, we thrive as well. But it's got to be strategic, not just throwing money. And I've seen Americans and the Europeans just throw money at a problem without it being strategic.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to empower the private sector to be front and center. So when I was running the World Food Program, I was talking to the private sector. How can I empower you to take ownership? What do we need to do together in some of these very, very difficult places? And so that's the approach. Why is America? Why is it that we have such great success and quality of life, though many people are beginning to struggle now? But it's because of the programs and the institutions and the systems that we put in place, and it's no different anywhere in the world. These are tried and true systems that work. And when you get away from that, everybody suffers. And America has got to get back to these fundamentals because I'm worried about America right now. I mean, young people can barely afford to buy a house, if they can at all. And the health care costs, the cost of just utilities and the cost of food is frightening. It's heartbreaking. My son's a sheriff deputy police officer in my home county. And he doesn't make enough money to buy a house, pay the bills, and he's the average American out there, and they're struggling. So we've got to get back to these basics of economic empowerment, because when we get back to those basics, well, America will be great again. As I say, you know, I think I'm ready for MAGA 2.0. Well,
that's it now. Okay, tell me what
so
you mean
what
by
is
that.
Well, you know, America, when we're good, we're great. And America can't be great if we're not good. So how about make America good again?
Amen.
Because right now we're not being good to one another, and we're not being good to our neighbors. If we get back to being good and caring for the poor and the needy and our neighbors in a way that's strategic, wow, America then will be the nation we all dream that it can be once again.
Thank you, Governor. Beautiful words. I was saying that we talk about technology and economics and finance a lot of times on this show, on this podcast, in this building. But ultimately, it comes down to values and leaders that can embody them. And you've been doing that for many years. And I really just thank you for sharing your insights today and your wisdom.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And as I said before, in many places, all the darkness in the world can't put out the light of one little match. And when I am speaking out there across America, I see incredible opportunities of hope and light out there, in spite of all the darkness, in spite of all the division. So let's be that light.
Yes. Amen. So thank you for joining this inspiring conversation with Governor David Beasley. You can find this episode and more on CSIS.org, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. This is Navin Girishankar, reminding you that everyone has a role to play in winning the tech race.